hate standing behind the podium. Can you hear me? Howard? Great. That's a rock star in education. And that's a rock star that we should acknowledge. Boston is really fortunate to have a number of them that around the country, I do more and more of my work around the country, we really stand out for that. And the study that Michael alluded to that the Boston Foundation supported was both stunning in terms of how strong the gains it showed her, but stunning even in the charter community, because no other community has had a set of schools that have had such impressive overall results. As Michael said, what you do with freedom or autonomy, whether you're a 14-year-old in the video or whether you're someone who's trying to start a school, is not guaranteed to be successful. In Washington, D.C., which has a lot more charters than Boston, actually the majority of them underperform right now in the D.C. public schools. So it isn't about getting to the starting gate, it's about what you do when you get there. We're really lucky in this town to have people who are just, knocking it out of the park. So as I got involved in education, having been first an entrepreneur, built a business, had some success with that, helped other people build biotech businesses, I got increasingly interested, and as I started to raise my children, in the question of how well are we doing in using education as the road to opportunity. My parents being immigrants, I thought, like many people in this audience, or your grandparents, or whatever, in my case, my parents, I thought despite the fact that they had to start over, learn a language, knew so little about America that they moved to Buffalo, New York. I just pointed it out to them. I wish they had, someone had given them a little more of a hint for where you want to move. It took me a long time to get to Boston. I haven't left. But they did have good, strong educations, and they did value that highly. And my brother's a professor at MIT, and I've done pretty well too in other ways. And certainly, chiefly, because we got the skills and education that we needed to succeed. And I always thought, this is America, land of opportunity. Look, a guy like me can succeed, everybody can succeed. And as I started to look at the data, I realized how untrue that was, at least on the data. And having spent for some time in science before I got involved in business, I always sort of went to the data. And as I got deeper into this issue, and saw, as Paul so eloquently highlighted, the just ridiculously powerful association between socioeconomic status, chiefly of mom, and student success. 70% correlation on any measure anyone's ever done. Anyone who knows anything about social sciences knows that a 70% correlation of a single predictor like that is essentially unheard of. Any correlation is fantastic. 70% is, virtually a lock on it. And yet, the socioeconomic status of your mother is not directly with you in the classroom. She's somewhere else. You're in that classroom. Why is that not working? That the classroom that doesn't know whether your mom is a college graduate or a PhD, 2 postdocs at home or whatever, or whether you're not a single mom who's a high school dropout, why does that matter in a classroom with a teacher and so forth? That may sound like a naive question, but I think it's surprising how rarely it's asked. And so, as I delved into this more deeply, I got really interested in this time issue. And I was fortunate that I started to get focused on this issue just at a time when a group of these charters were starting to break out. And one of the notable features of charters, not that commonly commented on then or even now, is that, for example, in Massachusetts, 90% of them, when they start with that blank piece of paper, don't actually think they can get the job done they want to do in 180 days and 6 hours. That contrasts with 0.0% of standard district schools in America. That is, there is no place in America that is meaningfully different or beyond 180 days and 6 hours, except for charter schools such as those, and a few other pioneers I'll mention. But everywhere you go, even though there's no federal law that says it has to be 180 days. It's interesting, when people get into states' rights, and yet there's no state that's moved beyond 180 days. There's a couple at 170. I work in Oklahoma, and they get all worked up that they're only at 170. But nobody's moved beyond 180 days, and nobody moves essentially beyond 6 hours, 6.5 hours, get into bus times and so on, but the same schedule. And so, being that I wasn't from education gave me maybe an advantage in saying, why is that? Is there some research basis that says, well, there must have been some studies, because there's lots of studies, right? where are the studies? And I speak a lot to education groups, and I'm very aware that they probably look at some business guy who's speaking at them and think, what do I know? So I always say, could someone in this audience please tell me the research basis for 180 days and 6 hours? And I'm still waiting for my first taker to tell me about any study. And the answer is, literally, the reason you have the schedule you have this year in most public schools in America is because it was the schedule last year. And it would be hard to change. You'd have to change agreements with unions, you'd have to change agreements and understandings with parents, you'd have to change understandings with kids, the bus would, oh my God, the bus contract would have to change. Believe me, anyone who's been involved in schools knows, the bus contract somehow is this, sacred item that can't be possibly changed. You'd have to, maybe you have to give them a snack. I mean, this would be very hard to change, let's not do it. Why stick with that? And I think that what Barry highlighted, and I really couldn't agree with him more, is as I thought about what my kids were living through, and this is a significant generational change, and that paragraph at the end of the book is an important point. Most of us in this room, even if we grew up middle class, pretty much had school as a key source of our learnings. Most of us, if our parents, have gone way beyond school. There are very few middle class parents in America who, at this point, let schools basically educate their children. They have summer camps, they have arts and music lessons, they have town sports, they hire tutors at a fantastic rate, one of the fastest growing pieces of the American economy, mostly under the table, so hard to track, is the $10 an hour, or $15 an hour, or $20 an hour college kid or whatever who's helping kids. At a number of suburban high schools recently, they've started to ask this question, and they typically get admitted rates of 50% of the kids getting tutoring. That's who's admitting it, right? So most families have moved beyond the middle class, upper middle class, the assumption that schools are going to get it done. In fact, as I go around working on this expanded learning time issue, actually middle class communities oppose my idea because they say, we already have that covered. One of the two members of the family has cut their schedule or changed their schedule, or we've hired a nanny, we've got the kid going to Kumon. How many of you have heard of Kumon? Or Princeton Review, or SCORE, or Stanley Kaplan, or college kid comes in and we're not giving up on the piano lessons. If you say, well, there might be more music, they say, yeah, but would it be, what's the Kawasaki method? Is that the name of it? I've had that asked of me. How would I know it'd be the same? Because we think that's a better method. Well, the answer is it might not be the Kawasaki method. So, you probably are against this. So, as we get into this work, we decided to see if we could do something about it, because we felt there were these compelling examples of schools that could do more with more time. And I want to be clear, what do you want to do more? I mean, clearly, I love the way, when you start with a blank piece of paper, as Michael did, and he allowed you to do, you could say, well, what do you want to achieve? Most people agree what they want to achieve. It's two things, and it was very interesting in some of your comments. They know that every kid has to get the basic math and literacy skills. I would argue science too. We could have a debate about what else should be in the list, but let's say basic academic skills to succeed in college, to succeed in life, to succeed in work, to succeed as a citizen, to be able to make decisions for themselves about whether that adjustable rate mortgage is a good idea or not, etc. Right? To have an informed opinion about whether we should increase troops in Afghanistan or not. These are things that need academic skills to interpret. They would also say you should have a well-rounded education. You should have arts, music, drama, sports. You should have chances to shine in ways other than pure traditional academics. You should learn how to work well with other people. You should get supported sort of socio-emotionally. You should develop physically. You should learn exercise and maybe even what it means to compete athletically and what comes with that. You should get all of those things. And that should just be part of what every kid gets. That's what most people say. Well, if you try to time size that, you run into some really big difficulties really quickly. You cannot really do what I just described, even as I mentioned, for upper middle class kids. You absolutely can't do it for kids who are struggling already academically. No way. I really don't believe, on large scale, I'm not saying no exception ever, but on large scale you can do it. So we kind of took the exact opposite route of Michael's, not because we disagreed with him, but we just decided there were some people pioneering on single site schools and increasingly on several sites like KIPP schools and so on, and doing it as charter schools with a lot of freedoms. We thought, well, let's see if we could help standard schools do it. And one thing I did know was that there were actually quite a few good people in standard schools, teachers and principals, who were dying to do better, who were frustrated by their poor and low performance, who wanted more of an opportunity, but the system wasn't really giving them that opportunity. And we were fortunate enough that when we managed to get a public policy through the legislature to help make it possible, which in the case of a standard public school means getting more money so that you can pay more for the more time, that they would step forward. We were lucky in our reliance on that, and a lot of schools over the last few years have stepped forward to try to develop a plan, and if it's a strong enough plan, to have the State Department of Education approve it and get extra money so that they can go beyond. Now, it turns out what's practically feasible is about 2 hours a day more. You can't really do more than 2 hours a day more in large scale with standard schools. That too is not based on some good study. I'm just saying at the human level, it's very difficult to find lots of existing teachers, parents, students who will accept more than about 2 hours a day, and almost impossible to find people who want to go longer a year. The president is great. The president has become the top spokesman for expanded learning time in America, which is awesome, but he keeps talking about losing summer vacation. Ixnay on that, President Obama may, because nobody wants to give up summer. Now it's ironic, because if you ask most working folks, like, what do you do with your kids in the summer? Oh my God, we got to figure out where they go, because I don't get 3 months off, but still, summer just can't be touched in America. So we could have an interesting discussion about whether it should. But 2 hours a day more, turns out lots of mortal human beings are willing to do it if you pay them the same hourly rate they made roughly beforehand. And so the question is, now 3 years, we're in our 4th year of doing this in Massachusetts and beginning to do it in some other states. Does it work? Can standard public schools, with the same teachers, the same bus, the same bureaucracy, the same building, the same everything, same students, are they able, no students on the whole in the typical school were involved, whose parents signed up for this school because they were ambitious for them. These are just whatever students you happen to have in the building. Can you succeed with them? And the answer is sometimes, not all the time. We have some expanded learning time schools in Massachusetts I'm not proud of, that are not making enough good use of the time. But I want to tell you about one that is, because I think it represents another step forward in our understanding of the core question that I think you framed properly, which is, can schools change the game for students who come from very disadvantaged backgrounds? That core question, do you have to change everything about their communities? And by the way, be clear, this is a big national policy debate. There's a group of people whose position is you cannot help poor kids achieve unless their parents get better jobs, their communities have better housing, the streets where they live are safer, nutrition increases, all of these other things. Schools can't be held accountable for those. It's not on them. Michael and I take the view that actually we think schools could go fairly far along that way, not to perfection, but so much farther than they have been doing that maybe we ought to focus there first, because that seems a little more practical than changing every single thing else about our society and economy. Whatever your one's ideology, that just seems like a harder problem even than improving schools. So I want to talk about the Edwards Middle School. It's a few miles away from here. It's in Charlestown. And they're in their 4th year of doing this, and they are really what gets me out of bed in the morning. There are quite a few other of the expanded learning time schools that have similar results, but this is one that I've spent more time digging into. Before I get to some academic, I'm going to give you some academic results because I just want to make you, we all know there's problems with tests and test scores, and we can all debate that. They're nicely really quantified. The bad part when you give, I think, just sort of soft stuff is everybody, I can tell you some of the schools that are not going anywhere have nice stories of individual kids, and so test data tends to give you some overall view, but I want to give you a little flavor of some of the other changes that have happened. This is a school that in 2006, there were 17 families in Massachusetts, in Boston, who actually said, I want my kid to go there. They needed at least 70, so 53 kids were kind of forced to join those 17 to get that minimum class. Last year, based on the progress they made in 3 years, actually 2 years, last year was their 3rd year, 250 kids wanted to go there, and they actually have to have a waiting list now. So one interesting change is just from unpopular to popular. I mentioned a well-rounded education. This school has the strongest performing arts middle school of any school in Boston. They have a large number of their kids now getting into the audition-based performing arts high school, Boston Arts Academy. Not so much because the kids who go there are naturally more talented, just because they're the only kids getting music and arts in there every day. They have the only middle school football team. Actually, there's now some others because the guy who ran the school for 3 years, has now been promoted, 2 years, has now been promoted to the academic superintendent for middle and K-8 schools, and he believes that kids have to want to go to school, and it's not just for the more math, but for arts and music and drama and sports. But until this year, they had the only middle school football team, had to play suburban schools, the only middle school lacrosse team, a variety of things, an amazing step dance program, lots of things that students, when you go to that building, and I've been there with many prominent visitors, none of them has ever said, thanks for the extra trigonometry. A lot of them have said, you know, I love step dance, I love this, I love that. So these test data show, forget that this is something called CPI, but forget what it is. If you're 100, every kid in your building, every kid in the school is proficient, okay, to get 100. The bottom, you see the line trying its best to catch up to the top line, that's the Edwards. The line at the top is the state. Bear in mind, Edwards kids are 90% minority, 90% so poor that their lunch is either free or reduced in cost, mostly free. You gotta be quite poor in America to get a free lunch at school. 25% of the kids are classified as limited English proficient, very challenging, obviously mostly new immigrants. A third are special education. So that top line is 30% poor, the statewide number. So catching up is good. In English language arts, they've caught up 80% of the difference that they had. The first year you see there is the year before expanded learning time, and then you see 3 years of expanded learning time. In math, this set of school kids now beats the state. Okay, that's pretty impressive to me. Science, they've reduced it by 2/3, the gap. I want to put it in starker terms. I want to give you a sense of Boston, because this is not about the state, right? This is the 5 different types of schools you can go to in Boston if you're an 8th grader, and how you do. Okay, the top line is if you qualify for one of those 3 exam schools Paul mentioned. Needless to say, if you get the draft choices you want, the highest performing kids on the ISEE exam, they do pretty well, so you're in the 90s. This is English language arts proficiency. They're in the 90s every year. Second line down is the story about charter schools in Boston. And this would not be the case in Arizona, this would not be the case in Washington, D.C. It wouldn't be anywhere near as much above the line as it is in New York as it is here. Here, we have a bunch of great charters, and they are really doing well. The bottom 2 lines, the blue and the yellow, are pilot schools and standard district schools. And as you can see, they started about half of charters and exam schools, and they ended about half of charters and pilot schools, charters and exam schools, not much motion. And then the green line is the Edwards Middle School. And as you can see, in 3 years, they've gone from actually below their peers to most of the way towards schools that are enviable in their performance. Same thing in math. Here the numbers are even more profound. I want you to think about proficient in math, and I'm going to show you an example of a math problem in a second. You know, 12, 14, 15% of kids in our standard Boston public schools in the 8th grade are proficient. That's not many, right? 56% this year at the Edwards, which was at 12 3 years ago. So we're talking about big changes in the percentage of kids. Now, how do you get there? You got to help a lot of different kids. First off, let's just take off the table, are these different kids? Let's look at low-income kids. As you can see, the gains are exactly the same. The numbers are even a little lower because the small percentage of kids in Boston who are not qualified as low-income, you know, obviously do a little better. You got to be able to do this with kids who are limited English proficient. Now, I want to call out a particular thing that's interesting about this page, okay? Look at these numbers at the right. If you're classified as limited English proficient in Boston, you're at about 5 or 6% proficient in math in the 8th grade right now in a standard school. Okay? The Edwards Middle School has helped you go from 15% to 71% proficient. 71 versus 6. Notice, by the way, there's no red or purple because there are no data publicly available for any school that has less than 10 of these students. And there is no 8th grade in Boston right now that, at a charter or an exam school that actually has more than 10 LAP students. Now, I'm not making any criticism of anybody else, I'm simply making a point, which is, if you want to succeed with all of the kids in Boston, you got to succeed with these kids too. Probably the toughest of all, special ed kids. Wide variety of needs. Some of these kids are just classified special ed. They're probably marginally legitimate to be classified as special ed. Some of these kids are severely disabled children. Much lower achievement, but still, compared to district schools at 4%, to be at 38 is kind of where you want to be, on the way, hopefully, to more. So, whenever I see test scores, I always think, well, what does that mean? This is an 8th grade test last year. Brian has 4/5 of a pizza left over. He divides it into for 3 friends equally. Which of these equations is equivalent to 4/5 divided by 3? Now, I don't happen to think 4/5 divided by 3 is a super tough problem, but in addition, you only have to pick one of these 4, right? And I think if you look at them for a moment, I mean, some of you are probably thinking, oh God, he's going to call on me, like Goldstein did. But I think, by the way, I mean, most of us learned something about taking tests. I mean, some of these are kind of absurd, right? 1/3 divided by 4/5 under letter A. I don't think you don't have to be good at this problem to kind of get that it isn't about 1/3 is divided by 4/5. I don't think you have to be good to get, that it's 4/5 somehow divided by 1/5, right? I mean, it's pretty easy without even actually calculating the answer to get warm, right? So here's what the difference is. And, again, if you think of high school math, this is 8th grade, okay? This is, this is not calculus, right? This is a pretty reasonable problem, it seems to me, to ask. Because sometimes people think, oh, it must be about who memorized the algorithm for the volume of a cone or some such thing. Like, we all knew, right? How many people in this room knew once how to calculate the volume of a cone, right? How many people could calculate the volume of a cone today? Any hands? Right? So sometimes you think, oh, those kind of questions are ridiculous anyways. Who needs that to be an adult? I would say understanding how you divide something 4/5 into 3, is the kind of common sense math you sort of have to have in life, right? So this is interesting. I just mapped this up. By the way, the reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to show what you learn now that you didn't know earlier, okay? And I have some data on that, but I haven't put it on the charts yet. But I can tell you that 3 years ago, Edward's kids were where you would think they would be on the similar question that was asked. Today, interestingly enough, if you're in those pilot or standard schools, about a third, you can see 30% of 476 pilot schools got it right, 30% of 1,600 traditional district school kids got it right. Bear in mind, at first I thought 30% is not bad until my colleague pointed out, if you pick any answer at random, you get 25%, right? There's only 4 possible answers, so you got a good head start. So 30% is probably not actually as good as it sounds, right? And my son explained, you just put down A at the end on every test question left, you still get 1 out of 4 if you run out of time. 76% of exam school kids, 80% of charter school kids, 63% of Edwards school kids got it right this past year. So I just want to give you a flavor of what you have to understand to do this stuff. So I want to stop there because I know the best part of this class is the discussion. I guess what I want to say is what I believe firmly and ardently and is really important for more people to believe and understand is this is hard stuff. You heard the level of dedication of the teachers at the match school. It is not done simply by showing up and doing kind of an okay job each and every day. And the Edwards is the best of our expanded learning time schools. It's not the average of our expanded learning time schools. So I'm not saying this is easy, and our results are not at the Edwards quite yet what I think Match would hold out, or a couple of Match peers who are at middle schools. But on the other hand, do not accept from anyone who tells you that we cannot do vastly better with the students we have, and I would argue off the Edwards data with the teachers and principals and systems we have, if we get serious about doing what it takes to have these kids succeed. Now, it's not about more time alone. You can waste time, you can squander time. Paul Grogan always accuses me of saying, in 20 minutes what could have been said well in 3. And he's known me long enough to have said that publicly to the Boston Globe when I was running for governor, which I appreciated. I was used to be on his board, actually. How did I get off that board? It's not just about time. You can use time poorly, and the schools of ours that have less effect obviously use time less well. It's what you do with that time. It's not time alone. The number one thing you need to be is extremely driven by data. You've got a personalized instruction. What makes Match amazing is these tutors. One of the things I love about Match is, I told you middle-class families need tutors. We hired a tutor who had been a Match tutor. So here we are, this upper middle-class family, and we're using the same tutor as the Match kids were using the year before, and she was fantastic. Too bad she had to move to Washington. She was great. So It's personalization, it's using data to drive things. I think it's a well-rounded education with kids who want to go to school and are engaged by school, not just challenged by school. It's certainly improving teachers and their skills. It's certainly being willing to say a teacher who can't get the job done, maybe ought to get a career someplace else and we can get somebody else to do it. It's a variety of things, of which time is only an enabling element, but I think a crucial element. So thanks.
It don't get better than that. 5 minutes, no more, because we got a lot.